Thank you to Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse-Oliver for her time. You can watch Lou's entire conversation with the Secretary online right now on the New Mexico in Focus Facebook page. Now it's time to introduce our line opinion panelists for the week. Welcome back Daniel Foley, former New Mexico State Representative, Attorney Laura Sanchez, always good to have Laura with us, and Dave Mulryan, President of Mulryan Nash Advertising. Thank you all for being here. Now we're looking ahead to Election Day Tuesday, starting with several state races, namely the race for governor. According to new polling from Emerson College released by KRQE 13 News, 50% of voters view Michelle Lujan Grisham favorably, while 49% of voters see Mr. Ronchetti as favorable. Overall, 49% of people polled plan to vote for Ms. Lujan Grisham, while 46% plan on voting for Mark Ronchetti. But that poll came out before Donald Trump formally endorsed Mr. Ronchetti on Monday. And Dave Mulryan, obvious question here, will that help him close the gap? Because he needs something here. He's kind of floating in space, not able to really get over the hump here. Is that going to do it for him? Is that going to hurt him with moderates?
I mean, possibly, but just so that we're aware of what's going on, with the numbers, as of yesterday, 383,300 Democrats had early voted. 273,904 Republicans had early voted. And interestingly, declined to state, people with no party affiliation, 121,000. So there is a lot of vote that's already banked, when you look at it. And I'm not sure that at a late date that, a Donald Trump endorsement, I never got the sense that Donald Trump was a big player in New Mexico. I could be wrong, but just that was my sense, and just stuff. So, I mean, he did not get along with Susana Martinez. And I don't know if people remember that, if Republicans remember that. I don't know. It's not clear. Like a lot of things Donald Trump does, it's just unclear whether his endorsement helps you or hurts you. Who knows, right?
That's a good point. Laura, Dave mentioned last time around, Mr. Biden defeated Mr. Trump by 11 points here, which turns out to be more than 10,000 votes. It's a lot of votes in New Mexico. Is it going to move the needle at all for Mr. Ronchetti?
Well, I mean, I think the real question is, how does this impact the swing voters, right? Because you figure that people who are already staunchly Ronchetti, which are probably, my guess would be they're Trump supporters or could be Trump supporters. They're going to vote for him regardless. And then there's people who are going to be really turned off by this, probably a lot of Democrats, very turned off by a Trump endorsement. So they were already not going to vote for him anyway. Yeah. So it's that middle swing vote, right? The people who are potentially declined to state, but there's a fair amount of people who are also registered independent. There's people who are registered in one of the parties, but they vote independently. So I think the real question is, are those people turned off by Donald Trump, or are they inclined to vote for someone just because of Trump's endorsement? I cynically, I think a Trump endorsement hurts a candidate like Ronchetti in this state. I mean, I think there are some states where a Trump endorsement helps, but in this state, when you saw such a huge margin between the two candidates in the last election, and so much of the rhetoric, I just don't see it helping Ronchetti, especially in the areas where he needs more votes. I mean, he's doing well in the South. Right. That's not a surprise. Oil and gas country, more conservative parts of southern New Mexico, and also, the San Juan area where there's also, heavy oil and gas sort of industry. And I think in those areas he's doing well. But if you look at where he needs to pull votes from, the Albuquerque, central New Mexico area, northern New Mexico, they're not going to be likely to be persuaded by a Trump endorsement. If anything, they'll be turned off by that.
Hey, Daniel, as we tape this, President Biden's in town and of course, campaigning for Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. And I bring this up to say his approval ratings haven't exactly been stellar lately. In the same sort of vein as Mr. Trump helping Mr. Ronchetti, is Mr. Biden helping our governor here, or are these things just a wash at the end of the day?
So first, let me say, since we're talking about these races, Gene, that I've donated money to both sides of these races this year. I mean, I've got Democrats I've given money to and Republicans I've given money to. So, I'm equally as jaded. I think, I think it's interesting, Laura's take, and I appreciate her her comments being the good Democrat that she is. I'm not sure that President Trump's endorsement is the kiss of death right now. He's got a pretty good record of endorsements that he's made. I think that, at the height of the election, when he lost the presidency in New Mexico, I think with the economy the way it is, the oil and gas folks, I think there's a lot of people who may be just as frustrated with the outcome of the last presidential election. And even some were thinking maybe Trump wasn't so wrong. They may not like him, but his policies may not have been so wrong. So I think it does give a little bit of help, definitely on the fundraising aspect.
Okay.
I think that'll pour some more money in statewide. But here's the interesting part. I don't know how it hurts him because they've painted him as a Republican Trump supporter from day one.
Good point.
So it's not like this is a revelation where he's run saying, I don't believe in Trump, I don't like Trump, and now we got this gotcha thing. They painted him in a box as being a Trumpista, and he just sort of ignored it. And now he's got this confirmation. I'm not sure if President Biden coming helps the governor or hurts the governor. I could tell you, I think that they're wrong on the way they're handling the abortion issue. I think bringing Kamala Harris in, I think in a heavy Catholic state, I don't think that people are necessarily 100% pro-life, but I do think that people are not as pro-choice as what we're hearing people like the vice president, the president are advocating for. So I do think if there's anybody who's going to potentially have a downfall of getting an endorsement by a president, a former president, or having work done, I think it could affect the sitting governor a little bit. I still believe she's going to win the election by 4 or 5 points. I still believe the ground game the Democrats have in New Mexico right now is far superior than whatever, if they even have a ground game at the Republican Party.
Let me ask Dave this about the ground game. As we all know, or might not know, Mr. Ronchetti is in the middle of a 42-stop tour across the state looking for independents and Democrats. You know what I mean? As Laura mentioned just a second ago, again, these last-minute pushes can be effective, certainly, Dave, but what do you make of Mr. Ronchetti's tactic here?
With this much vote banked already, I think one of the things that you have to look at for all of these races that are running right now, when I saw Kamala Harris and President Biden both showing up in New Mexico, I thought, okay, they're looking for bandwagons that are going to deliver, that the governor's going to get reelected, that's going to make it, they can chalk that up as a win because they went and helped, right? And I don't know, I just don't think the Ronchetti, and this is a complaint about both sides of the aisle. Politics is about ideas. What are we going to do to make the state safer? What are we going to do to make Albuquerque safer? What are we going to do to make sure that there's more economic opportunity? And we just don't hear this. We hear it's just, this, we bash them because they're a Democrat about, they're killing babies. And and the Republicans are like, well, we're not doing that. That's against our values. And then, ultimately we end up with electing people that don't do anything. They just, these cultural issues really, I just don't think are good tools for running for office. But, I like ideas. Here's what I'm going to do.
You're about it. You're about it. Guys, some other races going on statewide. Of course, Democrats have firm leads. Bernalillo County DA Raul Torres is leading the Attorney General's race by about 10 points, according to that Albuquerque Journal poll recently. That's as the advertising in his race, of course, gets more nasty. And so, Laura, is it too much for Jeremy Gay to make up at this point? 10 points is an awfully big lead going into the last weekend.
It's definitely a huge disadvantage for him at this point. He just doesn't have the name ID is one issue, right? And he has not been up on on TV as much as Raul has been. Raul had a tough primary. He was up early in that race and got his name out there. Just being, the DA in Bernalillo County means he has more name ID. Now there's negatives too, because some people blame him for the crime issue as much as they blame the mayor and the police department.
But has it stuck? He's blamed, but it can,
Right.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. And when you look at his experience, right, he's been a prosecutor, the DA for the last however long, and then he was a federal prosecutor before that. He's got the credentials to be able to, say credibly, this, I'm well qualified for this position. Now, Jeremy Gay, I think, has some good credentials on his side too, but he's from such a small part of the state that it's harder to get his name out there. And I think he's already sort of swimming upstream on that. It's going to be hard for him to make that huge margin up.
Daniel, can you do this in 30 seconds? How about Maggie Toulouse-Oliver? She has a 15-point lead. Are you surprised by that? Maggie
who's her
Toulouse-Oliver?
opponent?
Yeah, there you go. Right.
I mean, but I think that's an interesting deal on the difference between the AG and the Attorney General's race, right?
Yeah.
We're saying the AG, Republican candidate, has no name recognition, yet he's within 10 points. We have a Secretary of State race with a Republican who has no name ID. She's down by 15.
Audrey
So it just
Trujillo,
shows you how bad the Republican Party is at reading the tea leaves. You have someone that has no name recognition, is almost within single point digits of striking. Had you come out after the primary where Raul was attacked and continued to paint him in the box that he was painted in the primary and build your positives, you cannot come out, especially with early and absentee voting 2 weeks before running TV, and expect to be a legitimate candidate.
That's a good point. Dave made that point earlier. A lot of these votes have been cast already. That's the new trend by mail, up to 30% of them. Thank you to our Line Opinion panel.